Our next speaker is Mr. William Bourke, who is the founder and president of the federally registered Sustainable Population Party and ran as a candidate in the 2013 federal election. Despite currently living in Sydney, William was born and bred in Melbourne, where he attended RMIT University to complete his first business degree. He managed a federal election campaign with 26 candidates across Australia and continues to work to raise the population issue at all levels, including some successes with the often impenetrable mainstream media. In the last month, this included an opinion piece in the Sydney Morning Herald, a letter in The Age, and radio interviews on both 2UE and this week with Neil Mitchell on 3AW, and this morning in the Herald Sun on page 14. This meeting gets a mention. William was a key instigator of the concept of this community meeting, believing that we need to get a higher level of organisation amongst like-minded sustainability groups and concerned citizens in all political parties. Welcome, William.
Thanks very much, Jill, and to Sustainable Population Australia and Victoria First for hosting the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Really interesting, you mentioned, Clifford, the increasing cost of retrofitting infrastructure, and we've just, probably the biggest example at the moment is the East-West link, 18 kilometres, $18 billion. So $1 billion per kilometre. You know, probably back in the old days, you might have been looking at $1 million per kilometre when you just laid it out on the dirt that the government owned. Today, to accommodate the extra people from population growth, we're all paying through the nose for that unwanted population growth and unnecessary infrastructure. Of course, we should be prioritising public transport first, but that's another issue again. Today I want to talk about why I'm concerned about population growth in my hometown of Melbourne and of course beyond. It is a global issue, and I think the global issue starts with local action. I'd also like to mention a few random but related points and ask a few questions of the audience and of the attendees. Firstly, is there any more fraught issue to tackle than population? It's a difficult one. You've got you know, interesting allegiances between the left and the right, between talking about the challenging issues of fertility and immigration and so forth, can be poisonous at times. I think that activists, sustainable population activists, are up against all of these different forces. Not to mention politicians who want to demonstrate headline or aggregate GDP growth, and those other politicians that wish to please their backers and donors. Sheila touched on a couple of things there. Even local governments seem to like population growth, despite it making their job you know, much more difficult to provide the services. Does anyone know the name Paul Pasali? Local mayor in Queensland, and back in the 2010 Big Australia debate, he was sort of the poster boy for local government. He was the mayor of Ipswich at the growth area outside Brisbane, and he was on the national TV programs debating the Dick Smiths and the like and saying, look, you've just got a plan for it, you just need a master plan. He didn't say anything about the payment of it, it's just about a hazy plan. Well, recently he's been named in the Independent Commission Against Corruption for donations from developers which were undisclosed in his area. So very interesting connections there. In my view, the population debate and population growth is driven by money, a lot of money, and where there's money there's often greed. Polls show that most people don't support population growth, especially when they're given more information. More and more they disagree with population growth. And those with the minority view, i.e. those promoting population growth, do so against the broader will of the public, but they have the money, the power, the media platform. Again, Sheila mentioned these things. So it's often the loudest voices are there day in, day out, are the minorities with the money, with the power, with the media platform, with the propaganda units meeting up at 4 a.m. and ringing the, the media and saying, quote me on the news and so on and so forth, the Urban Task Force and the Committee for Melbourne and these sort of things. So it's a relentless push from the growth lobby against the majority to promote their will and their power and their profits. Of course, their arguments are flawed, but they are repeated so often that you sort of start to believe them. Of course, Australians are lazy, and we need to import hard workers. We've got an ageing population that will break the budget unless we can bring in younger workers. We need more people in order to pay for the infrastructure that Melbourne really needs. And, anyway, population growth is inevitable. So, of course, none of this is true. We rarely get a chance to dispel these often repeated myths to a largely punch-drunk public. Look at the Plan Melbourne spin from Matthew Guy. It's inevitable, we've just got a plan for it, and really it's about people having more babies and moving from Queensland. That's what the growth is about. He doesn't want to mention net overseas migration. He doesn't want to open up a conversation on that. So he says, oh yeah, these days people are having third children, because they never did in the past apparently. But the fact is, at the moment, net overseas migration accounts for around 2/3 of Australia's population growth, and through to 2050 it'll be 80% type thing, including the children of. So really it is the big factor. Now I grew up in Melbourne. I've lived around a number of states and territories up the east coast basically, and every time I come back and drive over the Bolte Bridge, I don't see development. I see a creeping concrete jungle that is taking over this beautiful city that was created, by people that had a vision and had a plan. We're spoiling that plan, I think. But I must make an admission. When I was in my early 20s, probably at RMIT studying business and so forth, and does anyone remember the Grollo Tower concept? The biggest tower in the world. How exciting. And I was actually excited by it. I must admit that, coming out of business background and so forth, I was excited. Melbourne would have something to hang its hat on, and we'd be bigger than Sydney, and we'd be this, that and the other. Well, I thought that was a sign of progress, and, I was brainwashed by the growth system. Is anyone here from the Herald Sun or The Age? No? Okay, probably led by those types of organisations, bigger is better. Well, I now know what real growth is. Real growth is growth in quality of life, not quantity. It's about growth in sustainability. It's prosperity through innovation. It's capital deepening, not capital widening. So in other words, it's better hospitals, better care in your hospitals, not just laying out more and more hospitals, at a rate to try and keep up with growth. So it's a dashboard of wellbeing indicators. It's not about per capita, or it's not about aggregate GDP growth. So others have articulated issues around green wedges and planning in the environment. And I just want to talk about Victoria's economy just for a moment, and ask you a question. Are you worried about Victoria's economy? Yeah. Because I am. Yeah. I'm really worried about it. A number of years ago, the Sydney Morning Herald had an article on Victoria's economy, and I know that, I think I saw Bob Birrell in the audience. Bob will know this article. The Yarra Monster is killing us. It referred to a report by Bob Birrell and Ernest Healy called Melbourne, a Parasite City, People and Place, September 2010. It talked about, in 2008-9, just a few years ago, Victoria imported $70 billion in goods and services per year. It produced $34 billion in exports. So less than half of its imports, a deficit of $35.7 billion. Importing double the amount that you export is not a good situation to be in economically, let me put it that way. Just a few years earlier, within the decade earlier, 2000, the exports were 30 billion. So they went from 30 billion to 34 billion in nearly a decade. But the imports were 45, and they went up to 70 billion in less than a decade. So from a trade deficit, if you like, of 15 billion to 35 billion in less than a decade, that's an extraordinary deterioration. And underlining this was a decline between 2000 and 2009 of Melbourne's manufacturing workforce of 16.7%, or 45,900 jobs. So, you know, basically population growth sucks in more and more imports as we fail to produce a diverse range of goods and services in Victoria, and it spreads our finite mineral wealth ever thinner. We've relied on places like Western Australia digging bigger and bigger holes, which is also unsustainable. Now, interestingly, of course, Victoria has a bigger economy as measured by GDP growth, but a bigger economy is not a smarter or a sustainable economy. Population growth is now overloading our infrastructure, it is diminishing our productivity, our plumber getting to the house or the delivery of goods and services slowed down, so our whole productivity is being diminished, and population growth is transferring scarce economic capital away from innovation in manufacturing or agribusiness, for example, and it's transferred into houses and construction. So lazy growth, easy profits for some in the short term, but not sustainable. I feel that means we're on a boom-bust path. And I think that at the starting point we need to tackle this by stabilising population, which will ease the growing demand for imports and simultaneously help transfer back scarce economic capital into, you know, away from housing and construction because it's not as profitable, because there's not the clients there to put your money into that, and I think back into more productive and tradable industries. And I think there should be major government support for this reinvestment into economic diversity. But of course, you know, what underpins our economic well-being is environmental well-being. We know that natural capital underpins our economic well-being. Water, arable land, oil, biodiversity. These things are critical to underpin a successful and prosperous society. So yes, we need action on population, but also I think a much more careful per capita use of our resources. And that's the only way that, with a stable population and a reduction in per capita impact on the environment, I think that's the way to improve our State of the Environment reports and get things back on track in Victoria and beyond. Closing now, just a quick comment about politics, because yes, I am involved in politics. As difficult a game as it is for a micro party to get any success, but in the context of an election, it is really difficult to get what's a single issue on the agenda. Now, I call population the everything issue, but fundamentally, a lot of people do see population as a single issue, and the media doesn't really join the dots. It's particularly hard to get coverage when the media often suppresses the issue and you have to compete with 50 other micro parties as well. And Clive Palmer taking up all the other space. But the media is not on our side, and I think I spoke to Kelvin some time ago and he said how easy it would be if the media was on our side. But Jill mentioned I have had some success recently, and yes, in the mainstream media, I think Sydney Morning Herald, 2UE, Neil Mitchell's producer wanted to do an interview, but it didn't happen, unfortunately, Jill, so apologies for giving you that wrong information. Didn't happen in the end with Neil Mitchell this week, but I had a good chat to their producer, and at least I've made a contact there to help get that on the agenda. But we are against a tidal wave of propaganda, day in, day out, and as mentioned, the loudest voices are the minority, but the most powerful, the growth lobby. So I guess, yeah, we did get the article in today's Herald Sun, which was good, with John Masanauskas, who tried a couple of angles, and then I just mentioned that I'll be talking about one thing today, and I want to leave you with one question. Given the difficulties of getting population discussed, do we need perhaps look at a different tactic? And to me, do we need to push for a standalone national vote on population in order to better inform both in general, our politicians, present company accepted, and our society? So that's the question that I guess I would leave you with here, and thank you very much for your attention.